The steam from my decaf latte fogged the bottom of the cafe window, blurring the gray afternoon into a watercolor wash of traffic and hurried pedestrians. My hand rested instinctively on the swell of my belly, a constant, reassuring pressure against the soft lavender fabric of my dress. At 6 months pregnant, my world had shrunk to this small, protective gesture, a silent promise to the life I was carrying. It was a world I was building alone, brick by fragile brick, after the last one had been so thoroughly demolished. The faint scent of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon was a comfort, a small luxury in a life that had become a careful ledger of expenses. I was tracing the rim of my mug when a shadow fell over my table, cold and unwelcome, pulling the warmth from the air. I didn't need to look up. I knew that cologne, that specific brand of arrogant stillness.
Mark.
My breath caught, a tiny, sharp thing in my throat. Well, he drawled, his voice a familiar mix of feigned surprise and genuine malice. Look what we have here. I finally forced my gaze upward, my heart beginning a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. He looked the same, impeccably dressed, a cruel twist to his lips that he probably thought was a smile. His eyes, however, did a slow, deliberate sweep of my body, lingering on my changed shape with undisguised contempt. Let yourself go a bit, haven't you, Amelia?
Wow.
You got fat. The words landed like stones, each one a calculated blow meant to shatter the fragile peace I'd constructed. The old shame, the familiar feeling of being too much and not enough, coiled in my stomach. He saw my hand on my belly and smirked, misinterpreting the gesture completely. Still stress-eating, I see. Some things never change. I wanted to say something, to tell him he was a monster, to scream that this wasn't fat, it was life. But the words were trapped behind a wall of paralyzing fear, the muscle memory of his emotional abuse locking my jaw tight. I could only stare at him, my vision swimming, the cheerful cafe chatter fading into a dull roar. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was far more terrifying than a shout. Guess I got out at the right time. Good luck finding anyone who wants all that. He gestured vaguely at my body, a flick of his wrist that dismissed my entire existence. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that crawled up my neck and burned behind my eyes. I was just a girl in a purple dress, trying to have a coffee, and he had turned this public space into another one of his private torture chambers. A low voice, smooth and cold as polished river stone, cut through the suffocating tension. Is there a problem here? The question was directed at Mark, but the presence it belonged to felt like a shield suddenly materializing at my back. I looked past Mark's shoulder to see a man rising from a nearby table. He was tall, dressed in a suit so dark and perfectly tailored it seemed to absorb the light around it. His features were sharp, refined, and his black eyes were fixed on Mark with an unnerving lack of expression. He didn't look angry. He looked absolute. Mark, for the first time, seemed flustered. He straightened up, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of dominance. This is a private conversation. Mind your own business. The man took a slow step forward, his movements economical and deliberate. The air around him crackled with a silent, lethal authority that Mark's cheap bluster couldn't begin to match. You are disturbing the lady, the man stated, his voice quiet yet carrying an unmistakable command. You will apologize to her, and then you will leave. Mark actually laughed, a short, incredulous bark. Apologize? To her? You've got to be kidding me. The man didn't even blink. He simply tilted his head, a gesture so subtle it was barely perceptible, yet it seemed to communicate a universe of threat. I am not known for my sense of humor. A different kind of fear began to dawn on Mark's face, not the fear of embarrassment, but the primal fear of genuine danger. He glanced from the stranger's impassive face to me, then back again. The power dynamic in the small space had irrevocably shifted. The man was a predator, and Mark was just loud prey. Whatever, Mark muttered, his bravado crumbling into dust.
He wouldn't look at me.
He wouldn't look at the stranger. He fumbled for his briefcase, his movements clumsy and rushed. She's not worth my time anyway. With that parting shot, he practically fled, shoving past a waitress without a word and disappearing out the door. The bell chimed softly, ridiculously cheerful in the wake of his departure. The cafe slowly returned to its normal hum, but the space around my table remained silent, charged. The stranger's dark eyes finally moved to me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than icy control in their depths. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to assessment, a quiet, penetrating consideration that made me feel more seen than Mark's cruel gaze ever had. He gestured to the chair opposite me. "May I?" I could only nod, my throat still tight. He sat, his presence filling the small booth, making it feel both safer and infinitely more dangerous. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply watching me as I struggled to regain my composure. I wrapped my hands around my lukewarm latte, the ceramic a poor anchor in the swirling storm of my emotions. The man's silence wasn't awkward. It was purposeful, giving me space to breathe. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than it had been with Mark. "My name is Jinwoo," he said it simply, as if the two syllables should mean something to me. They didn't, but the way he said them carried a weight that suggested they meant a great deal to others. "Amelia," I whispered, my own name sounding fragile and thin. "Thank you," I added, finding my voice. "You didn't have to do that." His gaze dropped to my hands, then to the gentle curve of my belly, which the purple dress did little to conceal. There was no judgment in his look, only a quiet observation. A man who derives pleasure from humiliating a woman, especially one in your condition, is not a man. He is an insect. The finality of his statement was chilling. He spoke of Mark not as a person, but as a pest to be dealt with, an annoyance to be swatted away. It was both terrifying and, in a strange, dark way, deeply validating. He flagged down the waitress with a subtle lift of his hand. "Another latte for the lady. And bring the check." He was taking control, smoothing over the disruption with an effortless authority that was clearly second nature to him. I found myself wanting to resist, to insist I was fine, but the truth was I was shaking, the adrenaline from the confrontation leaving me weak and drained. I let him do it. I let him take charge. When the waitress had gone, he looked at me again. "Do you feel safe now?" The question was direct, stripped of all social nicety. He wasn't asking if I was okay. He was asking about a specific state of being.
Safety.
It was something I hadn't felt in years, not truly. "He's gone," I said, which wasn't an answer. Jinwoo's expression didn't change, but I got the sense he'd heard the real answer in my evasion. Men like that do not simply go away. They linger. "Does he know where you live?" The question sent a spike of pure ice through my veins. Mark did know. He had a key to my old place, which I'd only just managed to leave. My new apartment was a tiny, rundown studio my sister Chloe had helped me find, but I had no illusions about its security. I moved recently," I stammered. "He shouldn't." Jinwoo's eyes narrowed slightly. "Shouldn't is not the same as cannot." He placed a sleek, black phone on the table between us. "My car is outside. I will take you home." It is not a request. The car was a black sedan with windows so dark they looked like polished obsidian. A driver in a crisp suit held the door for me, and I slid onto the cool leather of the back seat, feeling completely out of my element. Jinwoo got in the other side, the door closing with a heavy, satisfying thud that sealed us off from the city noise. The silence inside was absolute. He gave the driver my address, which I provided with a trembling voice, and the car pulled smoothly into traffic. I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of my neighborhood slide by, feeling as though I were watching them from a different planet. Beside me, Jinwoo was perfectly still, a study in controlled power. He hadn't asked any more questions, and for that, I was grateful. I wasn't sure I had the strength to talk about Mark, about the years of being worn down, of having my confidence eroded until I felt like nothing more than a collection of flaws. We drove for several blocks before he finally spoke, his voice a low rumble in the quiet car. "The father of your child," he began, phrasing it as a statement, not a question. "Is he a part of your life?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken assumptions. "No," I said, my voice firm for the first time. He's not. He doesn't know. Jin-woo absorbed this information without comment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. I felt the need to clarify, to defend the man who had given me this baby and then disappeared for reasons that were complicated and painful. He's a good man. He couldn't stay. It was a weak explanation, but it was the truth. Jin-woo finally turned his head to look at me, his dark eyes seeming to see right through the flimsy walls I had built around my heart. Then you and your son are unprotected. It wasn't an accusation.
It was a simple, brutal fact.
My son. Hearing him say it, acknowledging the small life inside me as a boy, a person, sent a wave of fierce, desperate protectiveness through me. He was right. We were unprotected. The thought had been my constant, waking nightmare. My sister Chloe helped when she could, but she had her own life, her own struggles. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. When the car pulled up in front of my dilapidated apartment building, with its cracked facade and graffiti-scarred entryway, the contrast between my life and the world Jin-woo inhabited was starkly, painfully clear. He didn't get out of the car, but he gave an order to his driver in Korean. The driver nodded and exited the vehicle, beginning a slow, methodical circuit of my building, his eyes scanning every window, every doorway. Jin-woo turned back to me. "This is not a secure location. It's what I can afford," I said, a defensive edge to my voice. "I understand," he said, and the surprising thing was I believed he did. He wasn't judging my poverty. He was assessing a tactical weakness. "I have a security firm. They can do a sweep of your apartment, install a better system. At no cost. Consider it a professional courtesy." The offer was staggering.
It was also terrifying.
Accepting it meant letting this man, this powerful, enigmatic stranger, further into my life. But the alternative, lying awake at night, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, imagining Mark outside my door, was even more terrifying. "Why would you do that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Jin-woo's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes held mine. "Because I do not like insects." Over the next few weeks, Jin-woo became a quiet, pervasive presence in my life. He never crossed a line, never made me feel pressured or possessed, but his influence was undeniable. The day after our meeting, a team of discreet, professional men arrived at my apartment. They weren't from a commercial security company. They moved with a silent, coordinated efficiency that spoke of a different kind of training. They replaced my flimsy door with a reinforced steel one, installed a complex alarm system, and fitted the windows with unbreakable locks. They worked for hours, speaking only in low tones, and when they left, my tiny studio felt less like a cheap apartment and more like a small, safe fortress. Jin-woo called me that evening. "Is the work satisfactory?" he asked, his voice calm and professional over the phone. "It's more than satisfactory," I said, running a hand over the cool metal of the new deadbolt. "Thank you. I don't know how I can repay you." There was a pause. "Your peace of mind is sufficient payment." After that, the delivery started. Groceries would appear at my door, not just staples, but fresh fruits, organic vegetables, high-quality meats, and prenatal vitamins. Then came baby supplies, a beautiful, sturdy crib, boxes of diapers, soft blankets, and tiny, perfect clothes. There was never a note, but I knew they were from him. I called him, flustered, insisting it was too much. "Your son requires proper nutrition and a safe environment," he stated, as if discussing a business transaction. "I am merely providing the necessary resources." My sister Chloe was deeply suspicious. She came over one afternoon, her eyes wide as she took in the new security system and the high-end bassinet in the corner of my room. "Amelia, who is this guy?" she demanded, her hands on her hips. "You meet him once in a coffee shop and now he's bankrolling your entire pregnancy? This isn't normal." "I know it's not normal," I admitted, folding a tiny onesie. "But Chloe, for the first time since I left Mark, I can actually sleep through the night. I don't jump every time the wind howls. He hasn't asked for anything. He's just helping." Chloe's expression softened. She knew better than anyone what I had endured with Mark, the constant anxiety, the feeling of walking on eggshells. "Just be careful, okay? Men like that, Men with that much money and power, they don't do things for free. There's always a price. I knew she was right, and a part of me was terrified of what that price might be. But another, larger part of me was simply awash with a profound, bone-deep relief. He was building a wall around me, and while I didn't know what his motives were, I was too exhausted and too vulnerable to refuse its shelter. One evening, there was a knock on my new, fortified door. It wasn't a delivery. I checked the camera feed he'd installed and saw Jinwoo standing in the hallway, holding a small, fragrant box. My heart leaped into my throat. I let him in, my hands trembling slightly. He looked around the small apartment, his gaze taking in the small signs of his influence, the full pantry, the baby books stacked on my nightstand. He held out the box. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, a blatant lie that was somehow endearing. "These are from a bakery I enjoy." I opened it to find an assortment of exquisite Korean pastries. The gesture was so simple, so unexpectedly domestic, it disarmed me completely. He was a man who could dismantle threats with a single phone call, yet here he was, bringing me sweets. It was in that moment, in the quiet of my tiny, safe apartment, that I realized Chloe was wrong. Maybe he wasn't doing it for free, but maybe the price wasn't something he would take from me, but something he wanted to give, his protection. The illusion of peace was shattered on a Tuesday night. I was asleep, lulled into a sense of security by the hum of the city and the solid click of my deadbolt. A loud, insistent buzzing from the security panel by the door jolted me awake. My heart instantly started hammering against my ribs. The panel was flashing red, with a single word glowing in the darkness: breach. Below it, a smaller line of text read, "Window, fire escape." Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I scrambled out of bed, my hand flying to my stomach as I backed away from the window, my eyes straining to see through the darkness. I heard a scraping sound, then the sickening splinter of the window frame giving way. Someone was trying to get in. Someone was ignoring the reinforced locks, trying to pry their way into my sanctuary. My mind screamed Mark's name. This was his move, escalation, terror, proving that no matter where I went, he could still reach me. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slick with sweat, my mind racing.
Who do I call?
The police? Before I could even dial, my phone lit up with an incoming call. The name on the screen was simply Jinwoo. I answered, a choked sob escaping my lips. "He's here," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Someone's at the window, I know." Jinwoo's voice was unnaturally calm, a steady anchor in my terror. "Stay away from the window, Amelia. Go into the bathroom and lock the door. Do not come out until I tell you to. Where are you?" I cried, huddling in the corner of the room, my back pressed against the cold wall. "We are already here," he said. And then I heard it, not from the front of the building, but from the alleyway below my window. The sound of two cars, pulling up without headlights, their doors opening and closing with quiet, military precision. There was a muffled shout from the fire escape, followed by a sickening thud and a strangled cry that was cut off abruptly. Silence. The terrifying sounds of the break-in were replaced by an even more terrifying silence. My entire body was shaking, but I did as he said. I crept into the small bathroom, locked the door, and sank to the floor, wrapping my arms around my belly and my baby. I sat there in the dark, listening to the frantic beat of my own heart for what felt like an eternity. Finally, my phone buzzed again. It was Jinwoo. "It is over. You can come out." "Open the front door." I unlocked the bathroom door on trembling legs. The main room was empty, the window now closed and locked, though the frame was splintered and damaged. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign that anything had happened at all, except for the lingering scent of cold night air. I went to the front door and opened it. Jinwoo was standing there, flanked by two of his men. He was still in a suit, looking as immaculate as ever, but his face was hard, his jaw tight with a controlled fury that was more frightening than any overt display of anger. His eyes scanned me from head to toe, checking for any sign of harm, before settling on my face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and intense. I shook my head, unable to speak. He stepped inside, his men remaining in the hallway like sentinels. He walked over to the damaged window, his fingers tracing the splintered wood. "He will not bother you again," he said, his back to me. The words were a vow, spoken with an absolute certainty that left no room for doubt. The cold finality in his tone made me shiver. I didn't ask what had happened to Mark on the fire escape. I didn't want to know. In that moment, the true nature of Jinwoo's world was laid bare. This wasn't just about security systems and grocery deliveries. This was about life and death, about a power so immense it could erase a threat from my life as easily as wiping a smudge from a window. I was safe, yes, but my safety was bought and paid for by a violence I couldn't comprehend. I looked at this man, this dangerous, protective, terrifying man, and I finally understood the price of his help. It was my complicity. The aftermath of the attempted break-in was a turning point. The fragile, unspoken arrangement between us was no longer sufficient. The next evening, Jinwoo came to my apartment, and there was a different energy about him, a gravity, a sense of purpose. He didn't bring pastries. He sat in the only comfortable chair I owned, a worn armchair near the window, and watched me for a long time before he spoke. "This is no longer a viable solution," he said, gesturing to the apartment, to the city outside. "Your former partner is being dealt with, but he is a symptom of a larger problem. Your vulnerability." I sank onto the edge of my bed, my hands folded over my belly. "What are you saying?" "I am saying you cannot stay here. It is not safe enough. The men who work for me can neutralize a single, predictable threat. But my world has other threats. Unpredictable ones. Enemies who would see you and your son as a weakness to be exploited." The blood drained from my face. Enemies. The word sounded alien, something from a movie, yet he said it with such casual certainty that I knew it was his reality. "I don't understand," I whispered. "What does your world have to do with me?" He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto mine, and for the first time, I saw a raw vulnerability in them, a crack in his armor of composure. "It has everything to do with you, Amelia. Because from the moment I saw you, you became part of it." The confession hung in the air between us, heavy and shocking. This wasn't about pity. It wasn't a transaction. It was something more. "I want you to move," he continued, his voice softer now, more personal. "I have a home, a place far from the city, by the ocean. It is secure."
Completely.
"No one can reach you there without my permission. A gilded cage." The thought was immediate and terrifying. He was offering me absolute safety, but at the cost of my autonomy, my simple, anonymous life. I would be his responsibility, his possession. "You would be under my protection," he said, as if reading my mind. "You and our son, our son." The words slammed into me with the force of a physical blow.
Our.
He had claimed my baby. This child he had no biological right to, with a single, possessive pronoun. It should have felt like a violation, a terrifying overreach of his power. But strangely, layered beneath the fear, was a profound and overwhelming sense of relief. Someone else was finally willing to carry this weight with me. Someone strong. Someone who saw my son not as a burden or a mistake, but as his own. "Why?" I asked, the question filled with all my fear and hope and confusion. "Why are you doing all of this?" He stood up and walked over to me, kneeling on the floor, so he was at my level. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before he gently, reverently, placed it on my stomach, his warm palm covering my own. The baby kicked, a sudden, strong thump against his hand. A slow, breathtaking smile spread across Jinwoo's face, transforming his severe features into something achingly handsome. "Because," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "He is the first thing in a very long time that I have wanted to build, instead of break." It was in that moment I made my choice. I chose the gilded cage. I chose the dangerous protector. I chose him. The confrontation I had been dreading came not in a dark alley, but in the sterile, brightly lit hallway of a courthouse. Mark, it turned out, had not been erased as completely as I had imagined. Bruised, terrified, and stripped of his arrogance, he had been left with a single, clear path: legal retaliation. He filed a restraining order against me, full of ludicrous, twisted lies, that I was unstable, that I was harassing him, that he was in fear for his life. His lawyer, a smarmy man in a cheap suit, had even hinted at a paternity claim, a disgusting attempt to gain leverage. It was a desperate, pathetic move, but it forced me out into the open. As I walked toward the courtroom, my hand in Jean Wu's, I felt a tremor of the old fear. But it was different now. It was a faint echo, not the all-consuming terror that had once paralyzed me. Jean Wu was a silent, imposing presence beside me, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the drab courthouse surroundings. He said nothing, but his grip on my hand was a constant, reassuring pressure. When we entered the waiting area, I saw Mark standing with his lawyer. The moment he saw me, and more importantly, the man beside me, the color drained from his face. The confident bully from the cafe was gone, replaced by a man who looked haunted, his eyes darting around nervously. He wouldn't meet my gaze. This was my moment. Jean Wu started to step forward, his expression hardening, but I squeezed his hand, stopping him.
No, y whispered.
Me. He looked down at me, a question in his eyes. He nodded once, a gesture of trust, and stepped back, becoming my shadow, my silent support. I walked forward, my step steady, my head held high. I stopped a few feet from Mark. He flinched, physically recoiling as if he expected me to strike him. "Mark," I said, my voice clear and strong, without a hint of a tremor. "This stops now." His lawyer stepped forward. "My client has nothing to say to you. I'm not talking to you." I cut him off, my eyes locked on Mark. "I'm talking to the man who spent 2 years telling me I was worthless, who tried to break into my home to terrorize me, who is now hiding behind lawsuits because he's a coward." Mark finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and fear. "You don't know what you're involved with," he hissed. "That man, he's a monster." "No," I said, a sad, final certainty settling in my heart. "He's a man who protects his family. You're the monster, Mark. You're the one who enjoys cruelty for its own sake. But you have no more power over me. You will drop this lawsuit. You will never contact me or my family again. You will disappear from my life. Do you understand?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The power imbalance had completely, irrevocably reversed. I was no longer the frightened girl in the purple dress. I was a woman standing beside a king, and I was learning the language of his kingdom. Mark stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He looked past me at Jean Wu, who was watching him with those cold, flat eyes, and whatever fight he had left in him withered and died. He gave a jerky nod, a gesture of total and utter defeat. I turned and walked back to Jean Wu without a backward glance. He took my hand again, his thumb stroking my knuckles. "I am proud of you, Amelia," he said softly, his voice filled with a warmth that was meant only for me. I had faced my past, and I had won. The first contraction hit me in the middle of the night, a sharp, breathtaking clench that stole the air from my lungs. I was in the house by the ocean, in a vast, comfortable bed overlooking a moonlit sea. For a moment, there was only the pain, and then a wave of panic. But it was immediately followed by Jean Wu's voice, calm and steady in the darkness beside me. "Amelia? Breathe." He was already awake, already moving, his hand finding mine in the dark. The hospital plan, which had been meticulously orchestrated for weeks, was put into motion with terrifying efficiency. There was no frantic rush, no panic drive. A private medical team was already on standby. Within minutes, I was being helped into the back of a custom-outfitted vehicle that was more like a mobile medical unit than an ambulance. Jean Wu never left my side. He held my hand through every contraction, his face a mask of calm control, but I could feel the tension thrumming through him, a fine tremor in his grip. In the sterile, private delivery room, his composure finally began to crack. As the hours wore on and my labor intensified, as the doctors spoke in low, urgent tones about the baby's heart rate, I saw a flicker of raw fear in his eyes. This was a battle he couldn't control, a force of nature he couldn't command or intimidate into submission. He was powerless, and it was undoing him. "You're okay," he kept murmuring to himself. "Everything is going to be okay." During one particularly brutal contraction, I cried out, my nails digging into his wrist. His face was pale, his own breathing ragged. "I'm here, Amelia," he grunted, his forehead beaded with sweat. "I'm staying right here." The world narrowed to a haze of pain, pressure, and the encouraging voices of the medical staff. Through it all, Jinwoo was my anchor. He wiped my brow with a cool cloth, whispered words of encouragement, his deep voice a constant presence in the chaos. He was no longer the untouchable Mafia boss. He was just a man, terrified and desperate for the safety of his family. And then, after a final, monumental push, the room was filled with a new sound, the loud, lusty cry of a newborn baby. A wave of relief, so profound it felt like a physical force washed over me. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, her voice bright. "A healthy baby boy." They laid him on my chest, so small and perfect, his tiny face red and crumpled. I sobbed, tears of joy and exhaustion streaming down my face. I looked up at Jinwoo. He was staring at our son, his expression one of pure, unadulterated awe. Tears were tracking silently down his own cheeks, the first I had ever seen him shed. He reached out a hesitant finger and stroked the baby's soft cheek. "Dae-hyun," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "His name is Dae-hyun." He leaned down and pressed a kiss to my forehead, a gesture of such profound love and gratitude that it healed every last broken piece of my past. He wasn't just my protector anymore. He was my partner, the father of my son, the man who had shown me what it felt like to be truly, unconditionally safe. We were a family, forged in fear, bound by loyalty, and now, sealed by the miracle of our beautiful boy. The months that followed were a surreal blend of domestic chaos and quiet vigilance. Our home by the ocean was a world unto itself, a fortress of glass and steel softened by the clutter of a new baby. Days were measured in feeding times and diaper changes, in the sweet, milky scent of Dae-hyun and the sound of his soft gurgles. It was a life I could never have imagined, both idyllically normal and profoundly strange. I would watch Jinwoo, a man whose hands were capable of such ruthless violence, cradle our tiny son against his broad chest, humming a low, tuneless lullaby in Korean until Dae-hyun's eyes drifted shut. The sight never failed to make my heart ache with a fierce, protective love for them both. His men, who I had once found so intimidating, now moved through the house with a quiet reverence, their faces softening whenever they caught a glimpse of the baby. One of them, a mountain of a man named Minjun, was caught by Chloe trying to secretly fashion a mobile out of polished bullet casings. My sister, initially my biggest skeptic, had become a frequent visitor, her suspicion of Jinwoo slowly melting away in the face of his unwavering devotion to me and Dae-hyun. "Okay, I'll admit it," she said one afternoon, watching Jinwoo expertly burp the baby. "He's a keeper. A terrifying, probably wanted by Interpol keeper. But still we laughed, the sound easy and light. We found a rhythm, a balance between our two worlds. I learned the names of his senior men and the basics of his business empire, which he spoke of in vague but honest terms. I never asked for details I didn't want to know, and he never offered them. In return, he learned how to assemble a ridiculously complicated baby swing and to distinguish between a hungry cry and a tired cry. He would come home late from meetings that I knew were dangerous, his face etched with fatigue and tension, but the moment he saw me and Dae-hyun, the hardness would melt away, replaced by a soft, weary relief. But the peace was always underscored by a low hum of danger. I saw it in the way he checked the perimeter security feeds every night before bed, in the way his phone would buzz with coded messages at all hours, in the occasional appearance of men with grim faces and new scars. One night, I found him staring out at the dark, churning ocean, his posture rigid. "What is it?" I asked, coming to stand behind him, wrapping my arms around his waist. He sighed, leaning back into my embrace. Just business. A rival faction is becoming ambitious. The casual way he said it sent a chill down my spine. Are we in danger? He turned in my arms, his hands cupping my face. I will never let anything happen to you or Daehyun. You are the center of this world, Amelia. Everything I do to keep this center strong. It was a promise and a burden, a reminder that our beautiful, peaceful life was an island in the middle of a very violent sea, and he was the one standing guard on the shore. Our life was a paradox, a fortress of love built on a foundation of fear. But it was our life, and it was real. We celebrated Daehyun's first birthday with a small gathering on the wide, windswept deck overlooking the Pacific. Chloe was there, along with a few of Jinwoo's most trusted men and their families. It was a strange, eclectic group, my bubbly, outspoken sister teasing the stoic, silent Minjun while their children chased each other around the patio. Jinwoo and I stood back, watching our son smash his fists into a small cake, his face a mess of blue frosting and pure joy. Jinwoo's arm was wrapped securely around my waist, his presence a constant, comforting weight against my side. Later that evening, after everyone had gone and Daehyun was sleeping soundly in his crib, we sat together on the deck, wrapped in a blanket against the cool sea breeze. The moon laid a silver path across the dark water, and the rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore was the only sound. Are you happy, Amelia? Jinwoo asked quietly, his voice a low rumble against my ear. I leaned my head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, clean linen, expensive cologne, and something that was uniquely his. I said, and it was the absolute truth. I never knew what happy felt like until now. It's not about the absence of fear. It's about having something so precious that you're willing to be afraid for it. He was silent for a long moment, his thumb stroking my arm. I was an empty house before I met you, he confessed, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed. Wealth, power, they were just furniture. You and Daehyun, you are the warmth, the light. You are the home. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the inky sky. The threats were still out there. The ambitious rivals, the ghosts of his past, the inherent violence of his world. They hadn't vanished. Our peace was not a given. It was a territory that had to be defended every single day. But looking at the man beside me, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my back, I knew we would face it together. He was my protector, my partner, the father of my child. He was a dangerous man who used his power to create a sanctuary for us. The purple dress from the cafe felt like a relic from another woman's life, a person I barely recognized anymore. That woman had been a victim. I was not. I was a queen in a dangerous kingdom, and my king was beside me. He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss filled with the promises of a lifetime. I love you, he murmured against my lips. I love you, I answered, my voice steady and sure. In the distance, the ocean roared, a constant, powerful reminder of the world outside our walls. But here, in his arms, I was safe. We were safe. And that was everything.